All right, so are you ready to take a deep dive into American culture? But with a twist.
Oh, a twist. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
We're looking at it through the eyes of the rest of the world.
Ah, I see. So, like, trying to explain America to someone who's never been here.
Exactly. Like imagine you're traveling and you're trying to explain why drive-through pharmacies are a thing, or why your soda comes in a bucket that's bigger than your head.
Right. It's always fascinating to see those everyday things that seem totally normal to us, but might be completely baffling to someone from another culture.
I know, right? And we're basing this deep dive on this video that lists 10 things that Americans see as totally normal. Get ready to chuckle because some of these are pretty wild.
Well, I'm all ears. Let's uncover some of those hidden cultural norms.
All right, let's jump right in with something that's near and dear to my heart-free refills. You know when you order a drink and it just magically refills itself without you even having to ask?
Ah, free refills. That's a classic American thing.
Yeah.
You don't see that too often in other countries.
And I think a lot of people outside the US are just baffled by it. But it's so ingrained in our culture that we don't even think twice about it.
Well, I'm sure there's a reason behind it, right? Nothing's truly free.
You got that right. It all comes down to how restaurants factor costs into their pricing. Instead of charging for each individual drink, they build the cost of refills into the initial price.
Oh, so it's not really free. It's more like a hidden cost that we're paying for without realizing it.
Exactly. It's kind of like that supersize me mentality. Bigger is always better. Speaking of which, can we talk about the American obsession with supersizing everything?
Ah, yes. The land of giant sodas and those massive portions. I've seen those pictures online. It's amazing and a little bit scary at the same time.
I remember seeing this video of a tourist just staring in disbelief at this giant soda cup. It was like they had never encountered such a thing before. It was hilarious.
Well, it's all about perspective, right? Our environment shapes what we consider normal.
Okay, so this next one is a bit of a sensitive topic, living on credit. It's almost like a national pastime here in the US.
The reliance on credit cards. Yeah, that's definitely a defining feature of American culture. I think it reflects a lot of things like our history, economic policies, and even our attitude towards debt.
It's so easy to get caught up in that cycle of spending and debt. It can be a real trap.
You're right, there are risks. But credit cards also offer convenience and flexibility.
True. But it's important to be financially savvy and use credit responsibly. Okay, enough about serious stuff. Let's move on to something a little more lighthearted breakfast. Specifically, the American love for pancakes, drenched in syrup and piled high with bacon.
Now that's a breakfast combo that might raise some eyebrows in other parts of the world.
It's like breakfast and dessert had a baby, and we named it pancakes with bacon. But hey, I'm not complaining. Those fluffy pancakes are hard to resist.
I have to admit, American breakfasts are pretty unique. Speaking of things that are hard to resist, let's talk about the American obsession with convenience. The drive-through.
Oh yeah, the drive-through, the ultimate symbol of American efficiency. You can get anything through a drive-through these days. It's kind of amazing.
Pharmacies, banks, even wedding chapels.
Wait, drive-through wedding chapels, that's a new one for me.
Yeah.
But I have to say, sometimes that drive-through coffee is a lifesaver, especially on those busy mornings.
It's all about saving time and effort. It's ingrained in our culture.
Speaking of which, can we talk about another distinctly American phenomenon? Suburban sprawl.
Those endless miles of houses and yards. Yeah, that's a stark contrast to the densely packed cities you see in many other parts of the world.
It's like two completely different ways of life.
Suburbanization was driven by a number of factors, like the affordability of cars, the desire for more space and privacy.
It's interesting how historical events and cultural values have shaped the physical landscape of our nation.
And this difference in urban planning has big implications for things like transportation, environmental sustainability, and even social interactions.
True, it's a trade-off. But enough about urban planning. Let's talk about something a little more social. The American tendency to chat with strangers.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The friendly American stereotype.
But is it really just a stereotype? I think there's something more to it, don't you think?
Well, I think it's rooted in our history as a nation of immigrants, where building social connections was essential for survival.
So it was about bridging cultural divides and creating a sense of community.
Exactly. And that legacy of openness has been passed down through generations.
But it's important to be mindful of cultural differences, right? What might be considered friendly here could be seen as intrusive in other cultures.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving right along, let's talk about American school lunches.
Oh, boy. School lunches. Who doesn't have memories of those cafeteria trays?
I think school lunches offer a fascinating glimpse into cultural values around food and nutrition.
It's like a logistical puzzle. trying to feed millions of kids across the country on a tight budget.
And while there's been a push for healthier options, there's still work to be done.
Okay, brace yourself for this next one. The American love for ice.
Ah, yes. The ice-cold beverage debate. In America, ice is practically mandatory. But in many cultures, drinks are served at room temperature.
I have to admit, I love my drinks ice cold. But I can see how it might be a shock to the system for someone who's not used to it.
It's all about what you're accustomed to. So the next time you're enjoying that ice-cold drink, take a moment to appreciate the cultural significance of that tiny cube of frozen water.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. From free refills to drive-thrusts, from supersized portions to the complexities of social interactions. Are you ready for the final item on our list?
Hit me with it.
Let's talk about patriotism, a topic that's both inspiring and complex. Why are Americans so openly patriotic compared to some other nations?
Well, American patriotism is deeply rooted in our history. As a nation founded on ideals of freedom, liberty, and self-governance.
It's like that shining city on a hill mentality, America as a beacon of hope for the world.
But patriotism can also be a double-edged sword. It can lead to blind faith and a resistance to self-critique.
So it's about finding that balance between love for our country and a commitment to holding it accountable.
Exactly. All right, so there we have it, 10 things that seem totally normal to Americans, but might raise eyebrows in other parts of the world.
And remember, this isn't about judging other cultures. It's about understanding and appreciating the diversity of human experience.
Every culture has its own unique set of quirks and customs. What matters is that we approach these differences with curiosity, respect, and a willingness to learn.
Well said. Now let's take a deeper dive into some of these cultural quirks and see what insights we can uncover, starting with those bottomless refills.
Let's unravel that mystery.
So those free refills, they're not exactly free, right? It's more like we're paying for them indirectly. But is there like a historical reason why this practice even started?
That's an interesting question, actually. You know, the idea of offering free refills, it kind of emerged in the early 1900s.
In the 1900s, wow, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a time when the restaurant industry was really booming here in the U.S.
So it was all about competition.
Exactly. Restaurants were constantly trying to find ways to lure in customers. And free refills were a way to stand out.
Like a way to say, hey, come to our place. We're generous. We'll give you all the drinks you can handle.
Exactly. It was a marketing tactic. It made people feel like they were getting a good deal.
Yeah.
And encouraged them to stay longer and maybe order more food.
So it's not just about quenching our thirst. It's about economics.
You got it. And, you know, this whole thing ties into that bigger theme we were talking about earlier, America's obsession with more.
From supersized portions to those buy one, get one free deals, it's everywhere you look.
And it goes way back. It's connected to the whole idea of America as the land of opportunity, a place of boundless resources.
The American dream.
Right.
Right. This belief that there's always more to be had, more to achieve, more to consume.
Exactly. And over time, that mentality has been reinforced through marketing and advertising.
So it's not just about history. It's about how those values are constantly being reflected back to us.
Right. So even something as simple as ordering a drink at a restaurant, it can tell you a lot about a culture's values.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another American obsession, convenience, specifically the drive-through.
The drive-through.
Oh, yeah.
That's an American icon, for sure.
I mean, is there anything more American than grabbing a burger and fries without even leaving your car?
It's the epitome of our fast-paced lifestyle, our desire for instant gratification.
But I wonder if we've lost something in this pursuit of convenience. You know, like that sense of community or the simple pleasure of just taking a walk.
You make a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so focused on getting where we need to go quickly that we often forget to appreciate the journey.
And all those little interactions you have along the way.
Right. It's a trade-off for sure.
Right.
But speaking of journeys, let's talk about how Americans travel across their vast landscape. Let's talk about suburban sprawl.
Suburban sprawl, those endless stretches of houses and lawns. So different from the densely packed cities you see in other parts of the world.
Well, after World War II, there was this huge boom in car ownership and government policies that encouraged suburban development.
So people started moving out of the cities in search of more space and privacy.
Exactly. And it made sense at the time.
Yeah.
But it's had a lot of unintended consequences.
Like increased reliance on cars, longer commutes, more traffic.
It's contributed to things like air pollution and the loss of green space.
It's a complicated issue. It's like we traded the walkability and vibrancy of city life for the peace and quiet of the suburbs.
But we lost something in the process. It's a reminder that our choices about urban planning have long-lasting effects.
Okay, let's move on to something a bit more lighthearted. The American tendency to chat with strangers.
Ah, yes. The friendly American. I think there's a reason why this stereotype persists.
It's not just a stereotype, it's part of our cultural DNA, right?
Think about it. America was built by immigrants from all over the world.
So building relationships was crucial for survival.
Exactly. And that spirit of openness and inclusivity has been passed down through generations.
It's like that saying, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet.
But of course, we have to be mindful of cultural differences. What might be considered friendly here could be seen as intrusive elsewhere.
Right. So when in Rome, as the Romans do.
Exactly. All right, let's dive into another uniquely American experience. School lunches.
Oh, man. School lunches, those were the days.
I think school lunches are actually a fascinating reflection of cultural values around food.
I remember those trays piled high with pizza tater tots and those mysterious rectangular things that they called meat.
It wasn't always the healthiest fare, but it was affordable and efficient.
Yeah, you've got to feed millions of kids every day. It's a logistical challenge.
Exactly. And while there's been a movement toward healthier options, there's still a lot of debate about what constitutes a nutritious school lunch.
It's a complex issue, for sure. Okay, get ready for this one.
Ah,
Our love for ice in our drinks.
yes, the ice obsession.
I mean, I personally love an ice-cold drink, but in many cultures, it's just not a thing.
It's funny how something so simple can be so culturally specific.
I know, right? It just goes to show you that our ideas of what's normal are shaped by our culture.
And what's normal in one place might seem strange in another.
Okay, we've talked about a lot of cultural quirks, but we saved the most complex and potentially controversial topic for last. Patriotism.
Patriotism. It's a powerful emotion.
Mm.
It can bring people together, but it can also be divisive.
How do you think American patriotism compares to that of other nations?
Well, in America, patriotism is often expressed in very overt ways. You see flags everywhere. You hear patriotic songs.
It's part of our national identity. It's ingrained in our culture.
But patriotism can also be used to justify negative actions.
Like going to war or discriminating against certain groups.
Exactly. So it's important to be aware of the potential downsides of blind patriotism
It's about finding that balance between love for your country and a willingness to hold it accountable.
and to recognize that patriotism shouldn't come at the expense of other values, like compassion and empathy.
So as we wrap up this discussion on patriotism, I think the key takeaway is that it's a complex and nuanced emotion.
It's not just about waving a flag. It's about how we treat each other, how we engage with our government, and how we strive to make our country a better place for everyone.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in our own little bubbles and forget that there are so many other ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And I think traveling is one of the best ways to break out of those bubbles.
Yeah.
You're forced to confront different customs, different values.
It challenges your assumptions, and it makes you realize that there's no one right way to do things.
And, even if you can't travel,
Yeah.
you can still cultivate that same sense of curiosity and openness right here at home.
Absolutely. There are cultural differences all around us, if we just take the time to notice them.
Whether it's trying a new restaurant or talking to someone from a different background, every interaction is an opportunity to learn and grow.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired to explore more cultural quirks, what advice would you give them? How can they approach these encounters with an open mind?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be humble.
Yeah.
Don't go in with the attitude that your way is the best way. Be willing to listen and learn from others.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right.
I mean, everyone appreciates it when you show it a genuine interest in their culture.
Exactly. And remember, you're not just learning about another culture. You're also learning about yourself.
It's like holding up a mirror to your own beliefs and values.
Yeah. And sometimes that reflection can be surprising.
So embrace the unexpected. That's what makes life interesting.
It's all about keeping an open mind and a sense of adventure.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into American culture, I'm curious, what's the most important lesson you've learned from exploring cultural differences?
That's a good question. For me, it's the realization that we are all connected. Despite our differences, we all share the same basic human needs and desires.
It's about finding that common ground, that shared humanity.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that's more important now than ever before. In a world that can feel so divided, it's crucial to remember that we are all part of the same human family.
Absolutely. Well said. On that note of unity and connection, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey of cultural exploration. We hope you've learned something new, challenged your assumptions, and maybe even had a few laughs along the way.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those minds open. Until next time, happy travels.